Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome to another episode of About Abroad, where it's my job to introduce you to people who have built amazing lives for themselves in various foreign corners of the globe. We're talking with expats and thought leaders about moving abroad, remote work, visas, and all the fun and practical knowledge that you need to know to follow in their footsteps. If you've ever dreamed of making a life for yourself overseas, maybe working remotely or embracing long-term travel, retiring or studying abroad, or even just taking a peek inside life beyond your borders, you've landed in the right place. This episode is brought to you by my friends over at Make My Move. Many of you are already aware that there are places around the world that want to attract remote workers to come and live there. But did you know that some of them will actually pay you to do so? Yeah, that's right. And aside from the cash incentives these towns might offer you, there are other incredible benefits ranging from free babysitting to concert tickets and even free healthcare. These places also make a terrific home base for digital nomads with super fast internet, friendly neighbors, and affordability and close proximity to major airports. In fact, the remote workers who relocate typically save around $20,000 per year by moving to these new communities. But perhaps most importantly, the locals in those communities are truly excited to welcome new movers in and get them plugged into the local network. The problem is, where do you start? But luckily, Make My Move is your one-stop shop for all things related to these towns. Since 2021, they've helped more than 1,000 remote workers and their families relocate, and through their platform, you can explore all the places that are offering incentives to come and live there, get personalized help to find the place that's right for you, connect with the locals, super important, and access support services to actually make the move a reality. Take advantage of all the benefits that come with your location independence by checking out makemymove.com via the link in the show notes. My guest today is my friend Lily Bruns, who is back for her second round here on About Abroad, and she brings a wealth of knowledge on all things digital nomad visas. She's been diving into a white paper for the last several months and sharing little tidbits of it around the internet as she goes. So it's not quite done yet, but it will be published very soon, and there's already a live database that she can share as well with lots of more detailed information. But today we just dive into some of the generalities of digital nomad visas, what she's learning, some of her favorites, and the ones that are the most unique in approaching this in the quote-unquote right way, and some of the subjects that we think these nomad visas need to address if they're to become really attractive for remote workers and nomads alike. So whether you are planning on becoming a nomad or just moving abroad for a period of time, there's probably a lot of information in here that's useful, food for thought, and I think you will enjoy it as well. So please help me in welcoming Lily to About Abroad. Lily, welcome back to About Abroad. Great to see you again. How's life treating you?
Life is good. Life is good. A little bit different than the last time we caught up.
You've been through some changes, huh?
Yeah. So I think I don't remember how many months pregnant I was last time we jumped on your show, and now I have a 13-month-old. So
I think that means it was about 14 months ago.
Life has been pretty intense. Yeah.
I can imagine. Where are you today?
So I'm back in Chiang Mai, Thailand.
Okay. Back, quote unquote, home, right?
Yes.
Nice.
Home,
how's it feel to be back?
It's great. I love Chiang Mai. Although I will say I've been trying to plan an escape because unfortunately this time of year, the air quality is pretty terrible. We had a bit of rain recently, so there's some relief, but I worry, I don't feel good. I worry about the tiny lungs that I'm responsible for. But then traveling, even when both parents work remotely, just traveling with like a kid is a whole nother set of logistics to organize for. So we've been talking about popping over to Vietnam, but just haven't quite gotten around to booking that trip yet.
Oh man, is the air quality thing? I believe we talked about this actually. Like, does it have to do with these like fires that happen once a year or something? Is it in China or?
There's some level of like agricultural burning, but there's also a lot of forest fires, and people will set fires on purpose because it makes it easier to collect mushrooms, and these are like very profitable for people to harvest. But I think it's also like atmospheric and seasonal, and it's like a Southeast Asia thing. Like it's a problem if you look at the maps because like there are like satellites watching from space, like identifying where the fires are, and you can see there's this like whole band that like goes from like the Gulf of Thailand up to China, where it's just like red.
Wow. Oh, that's wild. Yeah, I would consider like if I was coming to Southeast Asia, I'd be like, is it rainy season or not? I would not think to
Hmm.
look for smoky season.
Yeah, I don't remember this from when I was a kid, like, but
Yeah,
it's like, has it gotten that much worse, or is it that we're just more sensitive? We feel like, hey, I have a right to freaking clean air. I'm gonna like demand this. Um, yeah.
seems like a basic human need, clean
Hmm.
air. But yeah, I mean, a lot of us are living without that and without even considering it. I remember actually like it's weird. It's a weird thing when you grow up in the U.S. You like in a lot of countries that are like really really big. You just grow up in your little bubble and you don't know any different. And like so for me, for example, like I grew up in the Southeast U.S. and it was like summer just meant hot and humid. Like humidity is just like that. Those two things are synonymous for me. And I remember the first time I went out west, I did like a road trip out to the west side of the country, and I was like up in the Pacific Northwest, and it was like not humid. And I was like, oh, it can be hot, but not humid. Or then like going over to Montana, coming back to like smoke. I remember they were like, oh yeah, this is smoky season. And I was like, what do you mean? They're like, we have forest fires all summer. And it's just,
Yeah.
clouds of smoke. And I was like, I didn't know these things existed. Like I didn't know it's just, that's your normal.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, air quality is a problem in a lot of different places around the world. So I realized, because like my husband's from British Columbia, from like Vancouver, and it's rated as like a wonderful place to live, besides being like so expensive. But they also apparently like nearby have a seasonal haze issue, because again, it's like forest fires that can occur, and yeah, nowhere's perfect, right?
Yeah. You have problems
Everywhere's
everywhere.
got
That's
their
true.
issues.
Is so true. Well, I'm stoked to have you back on the show, and we're going to be talking about one of my favorite subjects, which is related to something that you've been very deep into as of recently. I've been loving following your work and the posts you've been doing all about digital nomad visas, and obviously this is a subject that people listening to this show are naturally have an interest in, and it's like something that really didn't even exist, or at least the name digital nomad visas didn't even
Yeah,
exist like just a couple years ago, and
just a
now there's
dream.
tons of them. It was just a dream, yeah. And here we are today, and you're writing this incredible white paper on all the digital nomad visa options. So I would love to just kind of kick it off with like maybe give a quick overview of for those that don't know you yet, like a little bit about your background, and then transition into what you're working on with this, and then we'll go deeper as the conversation unfolds.
Yeah. So, in brief, professionally, I work in the startup space, wear a lot of different hats, mostly marketing, strategy, content. And I freelance since I moved back to Chiang Mai in like 2017. That was like, Chiang Mai is my hometown, and I left at one point because I was like, this town's too small for me. I got big dreams. And then like I moved to London, I lived in New York, and then I was like, I'm really sad. Like I work all the time. I like can't afford therapy or my apartment. I'm miserable. What am I doing? So following that, yeah. So I decided to leave the big city, and because I was able to work remotely, I decided to relocate back to Thailand, and just really shifted gears and invested in the community here. And I had been running events for digital nomads and sort of getting connected to that community. And I realized that unlike all my fellow remote workers in Thailand, they didn't all have Thai passports like I did. They were having some trouble sticking around this place. And that's when, like 2019 is when this whole issue came on my radar with the Chiang Mai Entrepreneurship Association and the Faculty of Economics at Chiang Mai University. We put out a study to try to provide some data for the government, because people were asking for a nomad visa, and there were kind of public servants who were like, okay, like digital nomads, that's kind of a thing, but we don't get it. Who are digital nomads? Why should we care enough to rewrite our visa policy for them? They needed information. And things sort of well, let's just say it just like went from there, and it's not so much progress in terms of making the visa happen in Thailand. But I've just really been stuck in this issue. It just really feels like there's an opportunity here, and I'm still just like flabbergasted that Thailand hasn't jumped on that bandwagon. But many other countries around the world have. So that's neat.
Do you feel like so Thailand has been this nomad mecca for a long time, like Chiang Mai in particular, right? And so I would understand if someone said like, why do we need like we already have this, why do we need a new visa?
We don't need to attract nomads, they already just show up, like why would we make effort for them?
What do you say to that like challenge, I guess? And I mean, maybe we'll get to this later. I don't know if it's the right time to ask the question. I'm just genuinely curious.
I mean, it's really interesting when you see what happened with the pandemic, right? Because then that's what spurred a lot of countries to introduce the remote work visas, and all of a sudden Thailand's like, oh, maybe we'll just let people indefinitely extend their visas and stick around because our economy is completely battered, and like it's people like remote workers who are keeping destinations like Galpangan afloat, otherwise the tourism infrastructure would be completely useless because no one's coming in and out. But then it's kind of funny how the borders reopened and they're just like, so there's some level of like perhaps like risk mitigation, hopefully something as like devastating as a pandemic doesn't happen again, but you kind of have these stress tests that can occur, right? And you sort of realize like, okay, if all of your tourism strategy is geared towards like short-term accommodation, is that what you want? There are these problems of like over tourism that people have, and tourists come with their own set of problems. I'm not saying digital nomads like don't, but like, do you really want people who are just jumping in, jumping out, and they're only going to use infrastructure that is created specifically for tourists? And like, it's great that those experiences exist in your location, but is that necessarily generating benefit for your local populace? Like, outside of the obvious like jobs and stuff, but yeah, I think there's a way of like diversifying what you invest in, because if you are investing in like strong telecom, if you have co-working spaces, if you are increasing like the amount of like housing that's available, that's stuff that can be good for digital nomads and good for your local residents as well, right? Whereas I think pure tourism infrastructure, I think it's a little bit harder to make that argument. So I think that's one way of looking at it. But I think long term, the real big thing is when it comes to innovation. And I hesitate to even bring this up because I'm definitely not qualified to speak on this, but like taxes. I remember having a conversation when I was on John Lee's webinar a while ago. We sort of had this moment where it was like, this kind of big holy shit moment of just like, okay, beyond digital nomad visas, if people really start moving around, where do they pay income tax? And that's so central to the way that countries like plan their economies, that if all of a sudden like your tax base can just up and move, what do? So in the short term, it's like, okay, boost your tourism, invest in quality of life things that are going to be good for local residents as well, attract talent, have entrepreneurship. But like in the long run, I think countries have to be paying attention to this, because it's not even just digital nomads specifically, but remote work is really just going to reshape like the way people move, the way that people live, the way people plan their lives, how they invest, that's going to have like some big second and third order effects. So I really think this like remote work visas are just the tip of the iceberg, and countries should be paying attention.
Yeah, 100% agree with you. And it's funny you bring up the tourism dollars or revenue versus, like nomad or more midterm to long-term visitors revenue. And I had Jan de Jong on the show, who helped form the digital nomad visa in Croatia. And he was kind of saying like that revenue from tourism is actually like very, very small on a per capita basis. He was using Dubrovnik as an example. Like, cruise ships show up there every year with millions of people who get off the cruise ship, walk through the city, maybe buy a €4 ice cream, and get back on the
Right.
boat, and he was like, there's no revenue. He's like, there's not that much, even if they sit
This is
down
a
and have
huge
lunch or
toll on the
something.
city.
Yeah, it takes a massive toll on the city. And he's like, but if you flip that around and you look at, let's say, a digital nomad that's there for 1 month, like not only are they gonna, go out and have lunch and buy that ice cream too, probably, but they're also gonna go get their hair cut or get their laptop fixed at a local store, or have to, rent a co-working space, obviously rent an apartment. So all these things, like there's the second and third order effects are like really, really interesting.
Yeah. People are just used to doing what they have done, right? And it's like, you don't have to explain to someone like why you would have a tourist visa for your country, or why you have like business visas. And sometimes I'm surprised that like people can't see that like just having a hybrid of the two brings both benefits, right?
Yeah.
Like, why does your country have business visas? So that business people can come spend short amounts of time in your country, transacting your economy and creating potential opportunities. Like, digital nomads are that, but they're also here for like the leisure lifestyle portion.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So let's give people a little bit of extra context here about this overview of the white paper. Like, what is the project? How do you describe it in sort of like the elevator pitch style?
So the project is basically bringing together everything that I've learned over the last couple of years, about how to create a digital nomad visa, from my own journey, from following the journeys of others like Jan de Jong that you just mentioned in Croatia, like my friend Alana in Colombia, speaking to those folks, hearing a little bit from the policy people themselves who I've had the chance to connect to. I've like done lots of like panels on this topic for many virtual conferences and the like, to try to just understand that perspective as well. And what I see a need for is like an introductory resource. I've taken a lot of phone calls from folks who are interested, but like they just need like digital nomads 101, and before they can even jump to the policy side. So I've been doing a survey and trying to find other data sources as well to really capture a good snapshot of who digital nomads are. And that's difficult because it's not just like, there's kind of like the OG nomad, like freelancer, like half a step above a backpacker vibe of yesteryear, but the movement itself has changed as well, and like who needs visas. So it's trying to pin down those personas and the pain points, and make that really clear. And then, try to share some data about like, and information about why countries would try to attract this target population, whether that's like digital nomads who are traveling a lot, or remote workers who are kind of larger umbrella, different movement styles, but might be more attractive from a long-term play. Let's look at some like case studies of how countries have done this, who have launched. And then, I have this big database that I've been maintaining for several years since these nomad visas started coming out. And a lot of them are kind of crap. Like,
let's be honest.
So much, there's a lot of excitement around this, and there's a lot of hype. And I've really seen now how fun it is for people to like sprinkle digital nomad onto their news article, their press release, because it gets hits, it gets eyeballs. But at the end of the day, the solution that they're providing is not actually for like quote unquote digital nomads, right? They might be for certain types of remote workers. But folks who've been saying the new like 10-year LTR visa for Thailand is a digital nomad visa, I'm just like, are you bonkers? It's for 10 years. You have to
There's nothing like, nomadic about 10 years.
You have to be employed. You have to be employed by like a public company. Otherwise, you have to prove all these other documents. Like, just because there's a criteria in there that accommodates like remote workers doesn't make it a digital nomad visa, So I'm just trying to make some distinctions there. Like, hey, beyond the hype, because people will say there's like 40 plus digital nomad visas out there. And maybe there's 40 plus remote work visas out there, if we can just be a little bit more nuanced with our language. But like, if we're talking about digital nomads who are different from remote workers in my eye, because their lifestyle is defined by travel. It's not just location independent folks who have the ability to move around. It's folks who really primarily orient their identity and their lifestyle and how they plan, around that travel. Like, for digital nomads, are there actually any visas any good? So yeah, covering that whole span. It's like Digital Nomads 101. If you're a policymaker, this is what you need to know. Let's look at what other folks have been doing and like what's good, what's not working, and let's hear straight from the mouth of nomads themselves what their pain points are and what we should be trying to address.
Man, it sounds like a lot to dive into.
I don't know why I'm doing this anymore.
It was fun at first, and now I'm just tired.
You're not wrong.
Oh man, I can imagine. I mean, and it's a funny thing you bring up about like I read one of these articles recently that was like 52 countries with digital nomad visas, and very quickly as you read through them, you're like, well, that's not a digital nomad visa, and I was trying to decide, is it useful? Like I was questioning myself before our conversation, so it's cool you brought it up. Like I was like, at first I was kind of annoyed, to be honest. I was like, well, these aren't digital nomad visas. One of the ones was one that I was on, that I've been on for 4 years. And I was like, this is not a digital nomad visa. This is built for like retirees, like it just so happens that it applies to my situation. But like that one's in Spain, the non-lucrative visa was, and Spain has actually come out with a digital nomad visa now. So they have these two visas, which are in parallel, which in a lot of ways serve like the same purpose, like the infrastructure is the same, the timeline, the stuff you need to submit. The main difference is like for example, like one is built for retirees. So you have a fixed income coming in from like a pension or your retirement accounts or whatever, and you're not actively earning money. So therefore they're not like necessarily looking to tax you. Whereas the digital nomad visa, Spain is like, no, we want you're earning money. We want you to pay into the tax system while you're here.
Okay.
So anyway, there's like this, there are some nuanced differences that are actually impactful, but I found myself questioning, like, as I was reading that article at first, I was like, this is kind of annoying because a lot of these aren't digital nomad visas and like, they just shouldn't be in this article. And then I found myself wondering, well, yeah, but the person who's reading this is just looking for, hey, I have location independence. I want to move somewhere. All these are valid options, right? So, I don't know. I see why you want to separate the two, like remote worker and digital nomad. And then I also find myself wondering, like, well, like they're different, but I get that they're different. I don't know. I'm not even sure there's a question in here. It's an interesting topic.
Yeah, I definitely, for the purpose of the paper and in the language I'm going to be using, I'm going to try to be clear about that distinction when we talk about visas for remote workers versus visas for digital nomads. But it's like, God, like, it's unstoppable. You're not going to like convince every single journalist and blogger out there to buy into that distinction, but at least I'm hoping that with this white paper, some folks sort of could see a little bit of nuance in there, because I do think language is important, but you're not gonna, I'm not gonna become the language police. Like, people are gonna call them what they want to call them.
That would be a fun job, language police too. So, all right, well, let's. I would love to look at some generalities before we get into some specific visas.
Hey, can I get specific about a visa? Because it's just because you mentioned Spain, right?
Yeah, please.
And so there's so you're saying it's kind of like almost like a rebrand in a way of just like an existing like a visa channel that they already have, and they're targeting this towards nomads. But the difference is that they want to collect taxes. So are they doing anything differently about their their revenue collection process to make it easier for digital nomads? Or are they just going to be like, no, you can come in on the visa, but then you have to like go through our exact same ridiculously bureaucratic tax process?
To be honest, I don't really know. Fortunately, I don't have to deal with it. I've just moved to permanent residency recently, so I'm happy that I don't have to deal with that. But I think the idea is that they put you through the same process, and I think they're creating a ton of friction by doing that. Personally, like, I mean, I don't have to deal with it personally, so I don't have my own perspective. But that's my assumption, is that this is like problematic, especially when you're looking at other countries where they're not forcing you to go through the tax system. I think it has less to do with the money and more about the friction. Like
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
creating
People
this
don't mind
extra
paying
step.
taxes,
Yeah, we don't
but
mind paying
but
taxes.
they do mind bureaucracy and paperwork and taking time out of their lives to go sit in some office where it's like a second language for them, and
Yeah.
like they're confused about what's going on, and it's just hassle, right? Because a lot of people are just like, well, why am I dealing with this? I'll just leave.
Exactly. And I'll go to one of these other countries that doesn't require me to do that. It's like
Yeah,
when in like software, it's like, do you make me enter the credit card information beforehand, before the free
I
trial or
know.
not? Like
Yeah,
just get me in the door and then I'll spend my money later. Don't put all this friction in
yeah.
place. So
In a
that's
way,
my
it's like
take.
ultimate first world problems.
Yeah.
It
Oh,
is like,
totally.
you do have to call out like digital nomads for being part of like it's a very privileged movement. It's like you come from a
100%.
country that has a strong like knowledge economy, so you have these skills and you have a passport privilege, which allows you to move around pretty freely, right? But at the end of the day, it's still like, okay, like it's your customer, your end user is like privileged or not, like doesn't matter. You're not gonna like be able to shame them into going through extra bureaucracy if they don't have to, right? Are you going to solve the problem or not? Because like, I don't know, I'm just thinking about it like a marketer.
Absolutely. Yeah. 100%. And I can't stand it when people don't recognize that privilege. I was talking with a guy who was like frustrated with his accountant in
Mm-hmm.
Portugal because this guy earned, several $100,000 a year, and he was trying to he was a foreigner living there, trying to work through like, minimizing his tax bill in
Yeah,
Portugal. And I'm like, and his accountant wasn't really working with him to the degree that he would like. And I'm like, man, you're earning like 4 times more than the local accountant that you're working with. And
yeah,
you're trying to you're trying to get him to help you lower your, like, you're living a great life, man. You're fine.
yeah.
This is not something to be frustrated about. So recognize the privilege, and let's move past this.
For sure. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
really interesting to sort of see this clash of world expectations, like cultures, accounting practices. Because, like, in the US, it's just so normal, right? To just be like, how do I pay as little taxes as possible? Like,
Yeah.
that's since I was 18 and I started filing with TurboTax. That's basically like been my MO, right? And like now as an adult, trying to think bigger picture, I'm also just like, oh, right, but like, from like a moral and like social contract standpoint, I like the idea of taxes. Like it's good for countries to invest, right?
Absolutely.
But there's a real disconnect, like where the politics come in and like how you actually sort of fit into the system. It's just so indirect that you just sort of feel like, where am I in all of this? Like I kind of resent that I'm just kind of just like a pawn in all of this shuffling. And yeah, there's just something very deeply unsatisfying about the user experience of being, a tax-paying citizen sometimes.
Yeah, I think many of us can agree with that. We'll be right back to the show after a quick break for a note from our sponsor. This episode is brought to you by my good friends over at Greenback Tax, the very best in U.S. expat tax services and the company that I've trusted to handle my tax situation since I moved abroad in 2015. Greenback is 100% focused on helping U.S. expats with their taxes, and to date, they've filed almost 50,000 returns for nearly 15,000 happy customers like me living in more than 200 different countries around the world. After 7 years working together, I can say with confidence that they make one of the most painful parts of life abroad an absolute breeze with their automated systems that store all of your information for you to make tax filing easy year after year, and the friendly advisors who you actually have a working relationship with. There are no robots over at Greenback. Best of all, everyone is a CPA or enrolled agent with a specialty in U.S. expat taxes, which means they know exactly how to help you take advantage of some incredible tax breaks because you're living abroad, not in spite of it. As of January 23rd, tax season has officially arrived, so it's time to get started. Learn more about Greenback Tax today by visiting greenbacktaxservices.com via the link in the show notes. If you've made it this far into the episode and you're still enjoying yourself, then I would love to ask a quick favor. Open up the app that you're using to listen to this podcast and leave a quick review. You can do this in Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and really just about any platform that allows podcast listening now. If you can't find that in the interface of the app, then scroll down in the show notes and find ratethispodcast.com/aboutabroad, and you should be able to leave it from there. Thanks so much, guys. We really appreciate it and hope you enjoy the rest of the show. this whole thing about digital nomads and moving countries and where you spend a majority or a part of your time, like, adds so much complexity to that. And until we have, just a flat global minimum tax, this is something we got to deal with. But we also both know, like, this all goes way beyond just taxes. Like, this gets a lot of the limelight, I think, but it goes beyond just like, where can you stay and how much tax do you pay? There's a lot in between. And so what I would love to ask you is, like, you've done all this research, you've analyzed, I'll let you fill in the blank, the rough number of visa options and countries and stuff. But, looking at all of that, like, what general themes have emerged, positive or negative, from the government side and the bureaucratic side to the user experience side, the nomad side? Like, what are some bullet points that, pop to the surface in your mind that are particularly interesting and or like of note and worth discussing?
Yeah. So the database, like, I was collecting like all sorts of different visas, like not just the ones that were like labeled as digital nomad visas, but also ones like, non-lucrative visas, things like that I knew that remote workers and nomads were using. But I've refined from that list and I've cut down, and I have 41 visa programs that have a requirement to show proof of remote work. Right. Okay. So like, that's what I'm qualifying as a remote work visa. And within those 41, I'm still working to pin down the scoring criteria. And cause I want to come up with like an ultimate like score. Because I don't think I'm going to be able to so tidily just say like, okay, this is like the binary, like yes or no, like, is it a digital nomad visa? Because none of them are perfect. I like had a little group of folks who've been helping me with this project, and we came up with a list of like red flags and green flags. So a red flag is if there's any kind of like minimum stay, because it completely defeats the purpose of like digital nomadism. If you have to be stressed about like leaving for more than 6 weeks, or like if you're going to be gone for a total of 6 months, like, are you calculating that? Like, no one wants to worry about that. Right? Not a good digital nomad visa. But then like a green flag would be like, if you can apply for it completely online, which you would think for a remote work visa, for a digital nomad visa would be a given. But it turns out, no, there's like paper forms. You have to get documents like translated, apostilled, notarized. It's like, you have to show up at like the embassy in your home country, which is like yet another thing that actually reinforces this whole notion of like passport privilege. Because sure, if you're from like a country that's like well represented around the world, then maybe you can find an embassy like nearby. But if you're from like a smaller country, like, that's hard. Like, your options are really limited. So yeah, good things, bad things. And so, sorry, I kind of got lost in my own like explanation of complaints.
Well, I asked you like a super broad and complex question. Like, what are the generalities that pop up from this?
Yeah.
You're like, all right, I can go in a million different directions, but I think you're answering the question, like, for sure. It's these are some of the things that emerge when you start diving into 40, 50 different visas. Like, they're all imperfect. There are some things that make them more accessible, some that make them less accessible. I think you hit on two of the very important points. That was the case for me, actually. Like, I had to, I can't stand when you have to like go back to your home country to apply for a visa. Like that is such a big thing.
Some folks haven't like been home, right, for years, and they weren't planning to.
Yeah. I think that's a major red
and
flag.
Especially if it's like a 3 to 4 month like application process that requires you to like go visit the embassy. Like, do you live near the embassy? Like, because like in the US, that's a big country. Like, what, you're just gonna like post up in like DC for however long until you get your visa sorted? Like, that's expensive.
Yeah, I have friends that were from Colorado, and when they were doing the same visa process that I had to do, their embassy was in LA. So like Denver to LA is not exactly like a short trip. And you have to imagine too, like, some people say, oh, whatever. So you fly to LA, no big deal. Yeah, but then you get there and then they say, oh, you're missing this one piece of paper. You have to
Yes.
rebook your appointment for in a month. So now you have to
Hmm.
fly back again. Like this kind of thing happens in the visa
Absolutely.
world. So removing
And
location is a key factor.
yeah, and like birth certificates are a requirement for many of them, which I can get from the perspective of the government, but like you're already requiring a passport, and in order to get a passport, you usually have to have proved a birth certificate and then some, right? So like, do you really need a birth certificate? Because who's flying around the world with their birth certificate? Like you keep those important documents like in like a fire safe box somewhere at like your parents' house or something, right? Like,
Yeah, absolutely. Two other factors that come to my mind are is it renewable? Is
mm,
I think that's a factor. Like if I was looking into a digital nomad visa, I think that's a flaw with the Croatian one, for example, is like they've checked a lot of the boxes, but it's currently just capped at 12 months, and then you got to go.
mhm.
So that's fine. I mean, that works for a lot of nomadic types, and so maybe it's not a requirement, but for me, that would be a want, not a
Yeah.
need. And then the other is like the income threshold.
Hmm.
Like how much money. I've seen some of these that you got to make $100,000 a year or something, and you're like,
Yeah,
well,
Cayman
that doesn't.
Islands is like one of the highest.
Yeah, yeah. So I don't know what your thoughts are on those two or any others, but
Hmm.
those come to mind as well.
Yeah, I'll start with the income one. Like, I do think it's like totally the prerogative of a country to decide like what the minimum threshold is. That's like so reasonable, but
Very.
it has to be linked to reality, right? Because if you're asking for a minimum like income requirement, that's like 20 times higher than your own like minimum wage, like really, like if it's like indexed against like the local cost of living, or like let's say even like local tech wages, right? Like even if it's like 2 or 3x, that's reasonable, but it has to sort of, it has to be related to something, otherwise it just feels like greedy.
Yeah.
It's just like it gives off a bad vibe. So yeah, charge whatever you want for your visas, but like have some reasonable explanation, I think. And obviously, I think having a lower income requirement is going to open up the pool of applicants. Because yeah, I think it's just depending on how countries think about it. If you want to attract like a younger, more mobile demographic, then like bring that price down. If you really want to get people, and you're really looking to attract people to like become permanent residents or even citizens, you really want them to like move and commit, and you're looking after going for like families or like entrepreneurs, then okay, like maybe that's a good reason to like bring it up. So, you know, it's about like strategy, right? It's like, what is your policy goal, and like make sure everything is aligned there. Because if you're just making up numbers and throwing it out there, like you can't bullshit a bullshitter. Like
Yeah.
how many like people within this like in this space like work as like marketers, like entrepreneurs, like we know the language of marketing and like pricing strategy, right? Like we're going to look at these things and ask questions. um Take a breath.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah. You
then
have
the other thing was,
it's a savvy
yeah, go
customer
for it.
base.
Yes. Yeah, and we
Yeah.
talk to each other,
Hmm.
right? Especially because information on the government websites are so incomplete. We check all the directories, all the blogs. We try to find friends, right? Like because the information is not out there, so we try to make sure we can get it. On the other thing, so renewable. See, this is where I think it's really important to make the distinction. Like, is your visa program for digital nomads or is it for remote workers, right? Because it's
Yep.
like I don't think a digital nomad visa necessarily needs to be renewable.
I agree. I should have. I misspoke when I said renewable, and wanted to immediately like retrace my steps a little bit. What I mean is that I wish it would be. I would like for them to have a pathway to staying longer. So in my
Right.
ideal world, like that would mean converting to a different visa. But like for
Yeah.
example, if Croatia provided 1 year, you come, they make this process super easy. They don't
Hmm.
require you to pay taxes. You can apply online, or you can apply right there in the country. They just get you there. And then once you're there, if you
Yes.
decide, you know what, Croatia is actually where I want to settle down, that's
Hmm.
a win for everybody involved. You got to convert to a different visa. You become a
Yes.
tax-paying citizen, all this stuff. But
Yes. Yes.
that
Yes.
I like that. Not necessarily that you can renew it for 5 years as a nomad visa. I don't
Yeah.
think that's important in the nomad world.
Yeah. It's about having the appropriate channels for the right purpose, right? And I do think the purpose of a digital nomad visa should just be, it's like dating. You're getting to know each other.
Yeah.
Like if you're gonna like force somebody to like meet the parents and put a ring on it, like before they can go on the first date, like are you really doing yourself like any favors? Yeah, I think so. Colombia has just launched, and I hope I'm understanding this correctly, but I think this is new and that's something I haven't seen yet. It's a multi-year visa, but it's capped at 6 months per year, which I think actually makes sense for a digital nomad visa. Because that's truly for the digital nomad. That's not for the remote worker who's looking to settle down long term. They're going to want a different solution that gets them like 12 months long term pathway to a permanent residency or citizenship, right? But for the digital nomad who wants to be mobile, it's like, okay, like I applied like once for this visa, and like for multiple years, I can spend up to 6 months in this country. Like that to me is a smart move.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's really cool. I didn't know that aspect. And we just had a conversation with Alana from Colombia, and I didn't get to that,
oh, you
that
did?
point, I guess. Yeah. So
maybe she'll come correct me. But if they're not already doing it, someone should.
Yeah, it's a cool idea. It gives you like your home away from home base, and then also you can keep traveling. I mean, that really caters to that demographic. Are there any other visas like in particular that have popped out to you as like interesting? I don't necessarily want to say just good or bad or whatever. Like feel free to go down that path if you want, but like interesting, unique, especially efficient or useful or attractive. I'd just love to hear what you have to think.
Yeah, Estonia is definitely one that I'm like highlighting. I've picked a couple to do case studies on in the white paper, and Estonia is interesting to me because they don't have a restriction against local work, which is across the board like bog standard. The majority of digital nomad remote work visas say you cannot work locally, which makes sense, right? Because the idea is that this person is going to be like a net benefit to your economy, but their money comes from abroad and they're not going to take local jobs. And so that's great and fine. But what's your goal? What's your goal in attracting this young, talented, like highly mobile population to your country? And for Estonia, who have like a banging tech sector, like punch above their weight in unicorns, really want to keep a good tech game going. Like I think they're smart, and they're like, we actually want people to participate in our economy. Like we want to give them an opportunity to share knowledge, share opportunities. Like, because if you've worked in another culture, it's not like you can just show up on day one and get along perfectly. That's like, it's a process of like understanding how to serve customers in a different geography, understanding how to have colleagues who are of a different culture, right? And I think those things just occur so naturally when folks are actually working together, and like that's what's going to fuel innovation. And so I think that's really smart, right? If your goal in attracting like like remote like workers is to like boost your entrepreneurship, startup, innovation ecosystem, then you would be shooting yourself in the foot if you like prohibited people from taking local employment, right? Because like that's like what's ultimately going to lead to greater, let's say, like conversion to whatever the next step is. That's a little bit more of a long-term immigration pathway, a little more investment locally.
Yeah, Estonia's nailed it on so many fronts, and it's paid so many dividends for them over the years. They're like the poster child in a lot of ways. And I think you said punch above their weight. That rings so true. Any other ones that come to mind in particular?
I think like an example of another completely different approach would be like Georgia and Turkey. Both like don't have specific like visas for digital nomads, but have very permissive visa policies. Like you can just kind of show up. Georgia was touted as having a digital nomad visa, and it was, I guess, it was just kind of a bit of a branding exercise. There was like an official program that has like now since closed, but it wasn't really a new kind of visa. It was the same visa that like really anyone who was not even a remote worker could get access to. And that really put them on the map, right? Because they were one of the first folks to sort of see the opportunity and really speak to it. But hey, here's an example that like of a country that's like pretty open with its borders. And I wonder if it's something because they're kind of like hemmed in by a lot of mountains and like they're not worried about being overrun in the first place from a geopolitical standpoint, that they will like artificially make their borders more porous on the paperwork side. But yeah, you can just say that like, hey, like, why are you stressing about who comes in? Like, as long as you're keeping track of everyone, like, maybe that's the more important thing. Like,
they definitely seem to have taken that approach. I mean, and they're at another place, as you mentioned, like they're benefiting from this because they've become sort of that new up and coming place to go visit as a digital nomad. I know a lot of people who are actually like moving there and settling down there because you have an awesome quality of life and you amazing natural beauty of a city there, and Tbilisi that's like very active and forward thinking, and there's a lot to love. And then like you say, I think anybody can just show up, almost anyone, with like for a year and just like just be there, even open a bank account, I believe.
So I think there's like, what's your long-term objective? There's many different ways of going about it. And I absolutely think like countries have the right to make their own rules. It's not like I think, digital nomads are entitled to this thing. But I do, I am sort of curious if we can move forward. I think there's a place for visas specifically for nomads and remote workers. I sort of mentioned like passport privilege, right? Like if we have these specific visas that are open for people of all nationalities to apply, then that's like, I think that's a really good thing, because that goes towards sort of addressing like an imbalance that kind of exists and gives more people mobility tools, right? So like that's one important consideration. But I also kind of wonder why we're not normalizing remote working on tourist visas, because it's still in a gray area. And like back in the day when like business travelers were working, they were a problem, right? But then that whole thing sort of, all these countries got together and were like, obviously this is a benefit. We want like international trade relations. We want these business people to come and bring their opportunities, right? So let's just normalize the idea, and we're not going to make them necessarily apply for specific visas. They can come in and do a limited amount of work on their tourist visas. And like, rather than like rewriting your whole immigration policy, like I'm surprised that like I'm not aware of any country that has just been like, okay, so we got our immigration department and our labor department together and like, we're going to be cool. Like come in on a tourist visa, and as long as you stay less than 183 days, you're not going to become a tax resident. We won't like, and you don't take local jobs, we're not going to have a problem. Like, don't cause problems for our labor department or our revenue department. Like, just come in, work on your laptop. It's fine. Leave after 6 months. Like, everyone's cool. Like, you could just say that. I'm really surprised that no one has said that.
I'll be honest. That has totally been like with the whole digital nomad visa conversation. I'm like, when is that just going to happen? Like, and I mean, actually coming back to Jan from Croatia, he was saying like, their biggest challenge when they were like, they had immigration on board to create this like right away within like, and they passed their whole thing, as you know, in like record, like a month or something. It was super fast. But they had immigration on board right away. But the problem was like the labor department, the tax department saying, no, we want to make sure we get some revenue out of this. And the imbalance there, like the inability to come to terms is such a interesting thing. And it is like, if you see that it's a net positive for the country, you'd think like someone would just like slam the hammer and be like, everybody shut up. This is what we're doing.
It is just kind of a matter, because the way that governments work is that a lot of them can kind of just be like, everyone has their own fiefdom and their own agenda, know? So like, so it's not always like something that's like cooperative. Unfortunately, governments don't actually function like as a block, which is really at the end of the day, the challenge. But that's something I'm trying to like highlight in like the white paper. And this is kind of challenging, like to sort of verbalize, because it's how do you sort of make that clear that like, okay, it's your right, it's your prerogative to come up with all of your rules. But going back again to that friction thing, would you rather be capturing a little bit of tax revenue of at least from like VAT and sales tax, right?
Mm-hmm.
That anyone who's just spending, you don't have to think about it. You don't have to change your system. Wouldn't you rather just have more of that? That's like so easy for you to capture, like no effort, rather than like this much tax revenue from income tax from remote workers who are not used to dealing with your country's like bureaucracy, and you're not used to dealing with them either. Like that's like, why are we like missing this because we're so worried that people are going to get away with not paying this?
Yeah.
And sorry, for the people who are just listening on audio, I'm obviously like moving my hands very dramatically.
They can envision it, I'm sure. I mean, yeah, it's like, let's have you could have a small piece of a much bigger pie if you just let the pie exist. So,
yeah. But I think, that's me. I'm like a naive optimist. I've never been in government. Politics is complicated, and not everyone just wants to be friends like Lily would have them be.
Do you see this space evolving much? Like, do you see any major shifts coming, like based on the research you've done, or are we on a steady path now with this whole nomad visa thing?
No, I think we're starting to see some of the success stories, right? Like within sort of our crowd that we like to play with on LinkedIn, right? I was so excited when like Mita Karaman, who helped make the Barbados like visa happen. She like did a lot of community building and helped interface with the government there. When she shared like some of the results from their program, that was awesome because these programs are new. No one really knew what they were doing. So they put out version 1 based on their best guess. Some people had access to leaders within the nomadic community to help advise them. Some people just gave it their best shot. And we're going to see like version 2, version 3. I am optimistic that these things are going to improve. And that's one of the purposes of the white paper, is to try to like helpfully establish some benchmarks. I've been talking a lot of shit, but like I really do think that these folks have a really difficult job. And I'm really like, I think it's awesome that countries are looking at this opportunity, and we just want to make sure that ends up being a win-win, right? Because if people have bad policy and it's not getting them the results that they want, we want the information to be available to them to do a better job. We don't want them to feel discouraged that like, this is a waste of time.
Yeah, totally. That's all a lot of really good food for thought. And we're going to place the link to the white paper in the show notes so people can go in and learn more.
The white paper is not published yet, but I do have the database. Anyone can look at the database and like review that information for now. And I'm crowdsourcing some info for a while, but yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. Sorry. That's what I meant. The database, the what is public, we'll make sure there's links to in the show notes. And you have an ETA on the public white paper, or?
Oh, well, ChatGPT has been helping me write it, but it's still ongoing. I've taken a little bit of a pause because I was working on it. So I launched this mastermind early in the year, or last year rather, to have some accountability to help me sort of really actually write this thing that I've been talking about writing for a very long time. And we just wrapped up, and, I got all the way to the end of my own mastermind without completing my goal. So I'm just taking a little bit of a breather because the whole thing kind of just took on a life of its own, and I just really wanted to do a good job. And so I sort of broadened the scope from where I originally was doing it. But it's mid-March now as we're recording this. I want the whole thing to be wrapped up by the end of April. I would like something published to be out in the world by May. That would be very nice.
Awesome. Well, that'll be right around the time this goes live for everyone. So who knows?
Maybe put the link in the show notes.
maybe we missed by a couple weeks, but we'll see. Everybody will be on the edge of their seat wondering what is in the show notes. So this has been great. I learned a ton, and I'm sure others did as well. Did we miss anything before we wrap up and give you a chance to link to anything else?
I guess I just want to share a little bit, and like maybe this is even a question to you. So I mentioned this mastermind to you. So between the mastermind, the group that we got together was everyone was working on a project related to global mobility or like remote work, like lifestyle, not the work part, because like running a remote have that on lock, right? They're awesome. They've got the community, they like level everyone up. But I feel like that there's a need for that for like within the lifestyle space and within like the like yeah, it's just sort of like the larger, like the second, third order effects, like kind of space, you know? And I'm just a crazy person who wrote this white paper because I don't know, I'm just, you know, a little neurodivergent and I get obsessive about things and this is fun for me. But not a lot of people are motivated to try to tackle these problems. The good folks at Plumia are taking their own approach, and I think that's like awesome. I really can't wait to see what they do. But I don't know, like, how do we represent like the movement as a collective on the things that are not just like specifically work related? I've been toying around with the idea of like this cooperative organization called like the Remote Commons. That's kind of the umbrella under which I want to publish the white paper. And I like this idea of maybe launching like petitions for a couple different like countries, and like folks can sort of spin up their own like petition based off of stuff that like I've done before, so that no one has to start from scratch, right? Like let's leverage what's already out there, and then maybe we can build kind of a network. And if we can do something in terms of like advocacy for digital nomad visas, can we maybe do the same when it comes to this like accommodation issue, where like in many countries, right, there's issues with legislation around like Airbnb, and like medium term accommodation is like also difficult, right? People have like tourism or long term, they are missing the middle. Like I'm kind of, just curious. Like, I'm coming onto your podcast to ask you a question. Like, what do you think is the appropriate structure or like organizational framework for us to tackle these issues? Just because I don't think any single government's going to do it. And even the best intentioned private company, like the incentives just aren't going to like make sense for the big picture. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think the idea is like really to how do you like band people together who are all, we're not united by any imaginary lines of a nation. So therefore we don't really have like collective voting power or anything. But in this context, if you could, under something like Remote Commons, unite people and push people in a direction, sort of like an association, I guess, you could collectively have an impact and steer some policy direction, and maybe like also like product and service direction, which would obviously be powerful and serve our collective needs. So yeah, it's fascinating. Honestly, you're way ahead of me. I mean, I don't have anything genius to share here. I think it's a cool idea, and I would support someone like yourself who would actually put the hammer to the nail and make it happen.
Yeah. Maybe that'll be my next LinkedIn nerding out series. Let's publish the white paper first, get it done, Lily. You got to stop talking about it, and then I'll sort of start jamming with the community online to sort of get some ideas about how to take things to the next level, perhaps.
Yeah, I think there's a lot there. I mean, I've had people reach out about like some not the exact same idea, but just like similar ideas, all revolving around like, hey, we should have there should be a collective voice for people who are living this way. Like if you are living in the US, you have your local and state government, and you have your trade associations, or the company that you guys, you're a 10,000 person company in your city, like you have some collective power there. But like when you're dispersed across the world, you don't. And so, I think there's something really, really interesting to explore for sure.
Yeah. Stay tuned.
Okay.
Next time when Lily Bruns comes on to the About Abroad podcast, we'll see what progress has been made.
Round 3. I love it. Well, you're invited back anytime. And thanks for all the work you're doing and probing these topics and issues. It's fun to dive into it with you. And I'm always happy to nerd out with you on this stuff.
Yeah. It gives me great joy to talk about these things. I hope I wasn't too complainy. It's a fun kind of complaining. But yeah, it's been great to chat with you again.
Yeah, it's the best kind of complaining. I thought it was fun. Thank you again. Where should people follow along? Again, we'll put the database link in the show notes. But where else should people follow you? And we'll place all this down there as well.
Follow me on LinkedIn. It's the platform where I'm most active and where I'm going to try to galvanize some action around remote commons.
Cool. Okay, great. That link will be in the show notes, everyone. Thanks again, Lily. Safe travels wherever you guys venture off to next, and we'll speak again soon.
Bye.
Thanks for tuning in today from wherever you are in the world. Once again, I'm Chase, and this has been another episode of About Abroad. For those of you wondering how you can best support the show, I have made it super simple for you. Just go over to the show notes of the episode that you just finished listening to and click on one of the two following links. aboutabroad.com/newsletter to get our monthly newsletter, no spam, guaranteed, or ratethispodcast.com/aboutabroad, where you can quickly and easily leave a review for the show. It's not just important to me, it also helps more wanderers just like you find us. Finally, don't forget to subscribe on your podcast platform of choice, and we will see you again next week. Thanks again. Hasta luego, amigos.